this graphic to me just kind of captures it beautifully. You know, the core business is so powerful and so strong that the little new businesses really fight for attention. They fight for time, and they really struggle to be heard. So what we try to realize is that that means we need to have management processes that strike a balance between the pressures of today and the pressures of tomorrow. And one way that I like to think about this is if you think about two business situations where you got low uncertainty on the one hand. So think of, selling college textbooks, and even though that business is changing, but for a long time it's been pretty stable. The sales you made last year are going to be pretty similar to the sales you make this year. It's pretty predictable. You can know what the outcomes are. And in that situation, which you can think of as far over to the left on this diagram, you have very low degrees of uncertainty. The business is pretty predictable. And there, a lot of what we teach in the MBA program, a lot of our regular tools work very well. So return on investment, what's our internal rate of return, what's our net present value likely to be? Those are all questions that you can kind of answer with a fair degree of confidence in situations like that. As you move out in uncertainty, more and more of the value that you're creating actually comes from what I call option value, which is the right to make a decision in the future based on small investments. You could think of them like seeds that you've planted in the past. And for most human beings, this is very intuitive. We make decisions all the time that create options for ourselves. We go to university, we explore new ideas, we travel to different places. And why do we do those things? Not because we know for sure what's going to happen, but we do those things because we believe that doing so will create some kind of option value for our future. And so this has ramifications for how you manage your portfolio of opportunities. And I like to think of it in two dimensions of uncertainty. One dimension across the bottom is uncertainty about markets. So both internal and external. Who are our customers? Who do we need supporting us in the organization? Who in our ecosystem needs to be involved? That's market uncertainty. And then up the side is uncertainty about technologies or capabilities. Can we do this? Will it scale? What will the standards be? And what we'll see is that different kinds of projects tend to have different levels of implications depending on how much uncertainty they are presenting to you. So, of course, the most obvious place to start is with the core business. So, uncertainty is low on both dimensions. And these investments can be very innovative. So, I'm not saying the core business is boring. What I'm saying is it can be very innovative, but you know who you're doing it for, and you have a feel that the technology is actually going to deliver what you expected. So, things like, the enormous investment that's been made recently in remote working, in digitizing a customer portfolio, moving your technologies to the cloud. Those are all very innovative things, but you know who you're doing them for and you know how to do them. So that's the core business. And that's essential. That's job one. And management theory suggests about 70% of your investment should be lodged there. So that's obviously going to be a huge part of what your organization does, but it's not everything. And that's where I think we sometimes get lost. Now, moving out a level of uncertainty, you have what I call new platforms. So these are candidates to join your core business at some point in the, call it 2 to 3 year time frame. And these are big commitments, and they have to be made with conviction. These are the heavy duty investments to refresh or invigorate or indeed replace what your core business is today. So if I think of something like Adobe's very courageous decision to completely re-platform its business, going from shrink-wrapped software that got sold in boxes to subscription software that can only be accessed on the cloud, that was a big commitment. Their revenue went down. They had to explain themselves to the investing community, but it was a very successful transition of what had been their core business to a completely new platform. When Amazon decided to get into web services, they had to make a commitment. You can't just say to a customer, well, maybe we'll be here in a year and maybe we won't, if you want them to really commit to joining your platform. So new platforms are like the next generation core, and you have to be willing to make a commitment to those. Now, once you get beyond high uncertainty on either dimension, Now you're in the world of what I call options, where they are small investments that buy you the right, but not necessarily the obligation to make a given commitment. They're buying you flexibility. They're like the seeds that you're planting for the future. And so positioning options are a case where I'm pretty sure there's a demand for something, but what I don't know is exactly what solution there's going to be. So if you think about where we are right now, so here, how are we doing this? We're communicating, digitally over great distances. Well, what's going to be the next generation of that? What's going to replace Zoom? And the reality is there are multiple possibilities, right? There could be holography, sorry, it could be holography, it could be, movable screens, it could be something we beam up from our phones. The point is, we don't know. And in a case like that, where uncertainty is so large, if you're Zoom or Cisco or a company that really depends on being on top of things in telepresence, you really want to be making small investments in what that future might be. And there might be 8, 10, 12, 15 of them that you might want to explore. And that's the case of positioning options. And you want a lot of them, and you want a variety that will cover the territory. Different case entirely when you're looking at what I call scouting options, which is a case where I know how to do something. What I'm trying to do is bring it to a new market or a new geography or some new set of customers. And what you want to do there is a lot of experimentation, a lot of learning, a lot of kind of figuring out what things look like in the future. And a great example of this is a company called, it used to be called Vero Money, now it's called Vero Bank. It's dedicated to helping income secure but cash flow challenged young people establish a better future for themselves. So helping them build up some wealth. And so it's entirely branchless. It's a branchless institution, branchless bank. And the whole thing's intermediated by a chatbot named Val that you access on your phone. And very early in the design process, the discussion came up about, well, what sort of personality should the chatbot, whose name was Val, what sort of personality should Val have? And the team pretty rapidly broke into two competing camps. One camp was like, oh, young people, chatbots should be very casual. It should be like, hey, dude, hey, tough weekend. Don't worry, got your back, emoji, emoji, very casual. And then the other part of the team was horrified by this. They said, no, 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 this is your financial security. This is your future. You should be treated very seriously. This should be a very serious kind of conversation. This, should be Mr. Robertson. Let's do that. Now, in a typical company setting, right, how do disputes like this get resolved? Well, typically the most important person or the most powerful person or the person with the loudest voice makes a decision and off you go. Instead, what I'm going to encourage you to do in an option situation is do an experiment. And so we did. We got two interns. We put them in closets. We had some people program some wireframes. One with the Val type personality, the other with the Mr. Robertson type personality. We lured members of our target customer segment into the conference room with promises of free pizza, and we had them play with the two different options. And it turns out when it comes to your financial security and your well-being, you want to be treated like a grown-up. Val didn't cut it. Now, this is where I think the mindset is so different in terms of options than it would be if you were in the core business. Because in the core business, where you're expected to know what you're doing, the hey dude people would have been considered to have failed. They would have been considered to have been wrong. They should have known what was going on. But I would argue, no, it's a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. If you look at like Venmo, for example, that's very chatty, very casual, very full of emojis. So it wasn't an unreasonable hypothesis. It just didn't happen to be supported in this situation. So with scouting options, you want to do a lot of experimentation. And then the last category that we have is what I call stepping stones. So I haven't got a clue how to do this. I don't know if anybody actually wants it, but I think the upside is just amazing. And you can think of a lot of different product categories which have been carried away by so much hype and so much investment that it's kind of, you really wonder what people were thinking. And autonomous vehicles to me would be a perfect example. We've spent as a species over $100 billion on autonomous vehicles in the last 10 years, only to kind of realize that it's a much tougher challenge than we had perhaps expected. But in this situation, what you want to look for is what I call a stepping stone option, an early market where you can commercialize with the technology that you have right now, where you understand what you're doing right now, and where you can generate a little bit of profit, do a lot of learning, and kind of begin to seed the beginning of what could be a whole new category. So in autonomous vehicles, such markets exist. One of my favorites is the military. And so the military has a challenge. If they've got troops in battle, they have to supply those troops. And the traditional solution is you had two drivers driving a vehicle supply truck or vehicle. And that was not a great solution because it's putting people in harm's way. It's not very value added work. They could be doing something different with their time. And so the robots, unfortunately, are not yet good enough to take over that whole job. But the robots are good enough to play follow the leader. So what Northrop Grumman has been innovating and doing is creating this technology that can play follow the leader. So you have two human beings in the front vehicle, and then chasing behind them are up to six autonomous aided um, follower vehicles. So they kind of play follow the leader. And that's in market. It exists today because it's the military. They're making great money, right? So they get good margins on that. So that's the basic structure of the portfolio framework that we look at. So the question I often get asked is, well, what kind of allocation of resources should we be using? And the traditional answer is you want 70% in the core, maybe 20% in your new platforms, and perhaps 10%, not more than that, in options. So, a lot of money where you're going to be generating a pretty predictable return, some money where you really need to be pushing your organization forward into the future, and a small investment in options. And the research actually shows that the returns are actually inverse, that you get 70% return on every dollar you put into options, about 20% in what you put in platforms, and probably 10% return on what you put into the core. Now, why is that? It's because competition's caught up. You're reaching diminishing returns, and any core business over time is going to face erosion of its competitive advantage. So that's the basic theory there. So what do we actually see when we look at these things in practice? So I'll share with you the case of a medical device manufacturer that I was working with. They make really exciting things like catheter tubes and incontinence treatments and stuff. The CEO, when I first went to meet with him, kind of puts his arm around my shoulder and he says, "Darling, if you live long enough, you'll need our stuff." Anyway, so his strategy, right, is we want to be speed to market. So we want to be fast to market. And we want to be super customer responsive. Now, I would argue if that's your strategy, right, you would want a lot of investment in the core part, right? So speed to market, customer responsiveness. What does that mean? People pick up the phone, they drive carefully, they have great supply chains, they're super responsive on the ground. And it wasn't working. He said, "I'm not getting the returns on this strategy that I was hoping to do. I wasn't getting the growth." So we did an analysis of what was going on in his portfolio. And this was all done on spreadsheets back in the day. And this is what it looked like. And this is so typical that what your strategy says you should be trying to do is very different than what your actual on the ground behavior is delivering. And that was very problematic. And so what happens in situations like this is that we have these disconnects. We have four things that come unglued from each other. Strategy. When it's done right, strategy is pulling you into the future. It's saying, let's go forward and figure out what our point of view is. How are we going to make things happen? Then you got your budgets, and very often, where does this year's budget start? It starts with last year's budget, right? And so budgets often anchor you in the past. Then you've got your project governance process. And when you pick up your governance situation, very often what happens is it's a complete mess, right? You got somebody's pet bunny in there from 2 CEOs ago, and nobody's remembering why are we still doing this. And then you've got your process by which people believe that they're going to advance their careers in this organization. And very often those things get disconnected. So one of the things our software and our process at Belize was designed to do is try to answer some of those disconnects. So each of these bubbles is a project or an opportunity, you might call it. And the gold bubbles are the projects that are intended to be sold externally. So they're being developed for an external audience. The green bubbles are internal projects. And the reason we have them both on the portfolio view is that they often call on the same resources. So we want to make sure that we've got them visible. The view that you're seeing right now is what I call the company administrator view. So if this were your company and you were the person responsible for looking after the portfolio, this is the view that you would see. Right now you're seeing everything. You could also be looking at different categories. We have categories such as hold, discontinued, concluded, or different projects. These are all the active projects. We also have the capability to do a snapshot. So if you wanted to go back in time and say, hey, what were we doing in March? How did our portfolio look different? You'd be able to see that. And we see that as being valuable for the governance process. Done? Oops, where am I going here? So you can kind of see how the portfolio evolved. This is what we call the standard view, which is all the projects are the same. You can also look at them by opportunity size. So you can clearly see where some are more material than others. You can also look at them by how well they fit a strategic score that you set up for your organization. If we wanted to drill down on a specific opportunity, so here's an opportunity which we're calling a composite solution for college students. The way you set an opportunity up is this page here. So very simple. We've tried to really minimize data input as much as we possibly can. So this is the name of the project. It's an active project. It's external, so we're going to try to sell it to somebody else. And here's where we invoke this idea of option value. So it's a $50 million opportunity, and we're going to allocate $250,000 to see if it's a real thing or not. So what we're doing is we're allocating a certain amount of money, which you can think of as your risk budget or your risk capital, to find out if this is a thing. This is where you'd set up who the teams are. And this is also where if you use stages in your organization, you can set those up as well. So is it an idea? Are we exploring? Are we testing? Are we validating? Are we actually at launch? So you can look at all those things. If we look at our uncertainties, so this is how did that bubble get put in that particular spot on our portfolio matrix? This is the tab where that happens. And what we've got here is a set of uncertainties that come out of my research, looking at what are the uncertainties that can cause a business venture to fail. You know, that somebody didn't think of it, somebody didn't address it, it was a fatal flaw, and that actually led to a significant lack of progress for the venture. And what you'll see, again, we've kept it super simple. You can have a highly uncertain, moderately uncertain, or highly certain. And when we first set up a project, our default is nothing. So we set it up to be everything's highly uncertain. And our recommendation to you, and again, this is a management thing, but our recommendation to you is if whoever's scoring your projects, which we leave up to you, you can have an individual do it, a team do it, you know, a more formal process doing it. However you do that, our recommendation is if you're going to score it anything other than highly uncertain, is we want to know why. What were you thinking? What were the team thinking? So let's take this one. Endorsement by opinion leaders relevant to your business. You can see this team has scored it as highly certain. Like we think we know what we're doing. But you'll also see next to highly certain is a comment bubble. Now, if I click on that comment bubble, now what that opens up is the rationale. Someone's put in the reason why we thought it was highly certain. So look, we've got a great op-ed in the student newspaper. Remember, this is a student composting project, and they've got the URL there. So if someone who joins the team later or is, you know, looking at the history of this project, let's say we did discontinue it and we just want to know what were people thinking as they were going through it in the moment, we capture this comment. And you can see I've got the URL that takes me directly to this article. And I'm not saying it's a fact yet, but what I'm saying is this student group has said, hey, we have some data here that show us that there is a certain amount of support for this idea. So this is meant to address the reality that in many cases, you know, innovation teams, there's a lot of turnover, right? And so I join a project 18 months or 24 months, a year or two after it's gotten going. How do I even know what went on? So with this page, you can actually look at the comments, right? How have I addressed customer risk perceptions? And you can just kind of follow along with the comments as they accumulate across the life of a project. And you'll see these questions are both about markets and they're about technologies and capabilities, just as the theory would suggest. Checkpoints is actually the heart and soul of this methodology. It's based on discovery-driven growth. And what it suggests is that rather than trying to plan as though you knew what you were doing, what you're going to plan to do is plan to learn. And you learn at each of these key checkpoints, which is some kind of learning event. Now you notice here we've got our budget. It's our 250,000 that we said we were going to spend to explore. We've allocated 35,000 of it to a set of checkpoints. And here they are. So initial customer interviews, competitor assessment, prototypes, and so forth. And we've got a beta test of initial campus. These are completely customizable. And you can see we've got budgets put against each of these. And at each checkpoint, what we have is a set of assumptions that we're testing. So now what you can look at is you can say, okay, for $5,000, here are the assumptions that I'm intending to test at this key checkpoint. So what you can do now is if you're an executive or a leader and you want to know how are our teams progressing, how are things going forward, what you can see is what we're working on validating in terms of the assumptions. We've also got a link to what we call the document repository. Now what that is your more detailed documents. We don't keep those in this system. We just want you to know that they exist. So this could be Box, Dropbox, Google Drive. In this case, it's a Dropbox file. This is going to be where your interview transcripts, your PowerPoint decks, yes, indeed, your Excel spreadsheets, whatever it is that's the detailed information that you want kept to yourself, and you don't necessarily want to share that with the world. This gives you a way of linking out to those things. Adding a set of assumptions is super easy. You just click on this view, and you'll see we've got assumptions. Here they all are. We've got some notes, project team notes. We've got due dates, which this one's already slipped, right? You've got the comments again by whoever's there. And again, this is that same idea of making it visible, what's going on. We've got an audit log, keeps track of the money. And we've got a description of the checkpoint, which if you want to work with numbers of people, you can do. And you'll see we've got all these different checkpoints that are attached to this project. Strategic alignment is set up by the company admin, and that is completely customizable up to your firm. And it's also customizable in terms of the scores. This particular hypothetical example has a score of 1 to 100. Other companies use different scores. And we make no pretense that this makes it scientific in any way. But what we do know is that it kind of reminds people. So if we said, oh, our big strategic push is going to be Argentina, and somebody comes up and says, oh, I've got this great idea for Peru, either we have to change our strategy or we have to have a conversation about whether that's a good idea or not. So that allows you to make that very explicit. So that's what our portfolio view looks like. We've also got a place where you can indeed store ideas. And ideas are in an idea inventory. And we can search the idea inventory by a number of different ways. So if I want to see all the ideas that relate to dogs, for example, I click in dog and there they are. These are the ideas related to dogs, but I can also search them by strategic score. So which ideas score the most. I can also look at them just by the idea name, or if I just want to see what's new, I can look at them by the newest first. If I decide that an idea is something I want to work on now. So our recommendation is that things that are just in the idea inventory are just that they're somebody came up with an idea. I want to keep track of it so I don't forget it. I just put it in there. If I decide it's valuable and I want to really do something with it, now I can click here, convert it to an opportunity, and then it goes back onto our portfolio matrix, and you can invoke all the other metrics. An idea detail page looks like this. And again, remember our premise here is we want to minimize the amount of data entry and sort of sculpting of smoke that we require of people. So all we ask to capture an idea is the idea name, the description. If it's not the person that's doing the data entry who contributed it, that goes in. You can have ideas that are active, on hold, or inactive. You can look at them that way. And then here are the strategic scores, so you can score them. So you can see very minimal data input, very, very simple. And then lastly, we have our dashboard, which is sort of the God view, right? So this particular hypothetical company has 30 open ideas, 16 active opportunities. If everything in the world went right, here's a huge value that this opportunity portfolio has. Here's what we've spent. Here's what's been allocated. Here's our budget. So that's the what a typical like executive user would see. As the company administrator, you have this tab that's available to you, and this is where you set up users, you create your strategic alignment scores, you can establish stages if you want. If you want to for your organization, you can create default checkpoints. So every single project has several checkpoints that are set up in advance. You can do that as well. So that, in a nutshell, is the SparcHub system.